The door clicked open, and my heart stopped. I stood there, stark naked, the San Francisco skyline mocking me through the hotel window, as the room service waiter froze in the doorway, tray trembling in his hands. In that split second, my life, already a mess of doubt and half-truths, ignited into a wildfire of shame and something I couldn't name. I'm Jamie Carter, a 24-year-old artist who'd fled small-town Ohio for the city's promise of freedom, only to find myself trapped in a different kind of cage, my own head. I checked into the Golden Gate Hotel to escape the noise of my thoughts, to sketch the city and maybe, just maybe, figure out who I was. That night, I'd been pacing my room, fresh from a shower, sketching in my mind, when I realized I hadn't eaten all day. A quick call to room service, and I thought nothing of it, until the door swung open. Sir." The waiter's voice was low, steady, but his wide eyes betrayed him. He was maybe my age, with warm brown skin, a crisp white shirt rolled up to his elbows, and a name tag that read Ethan. He didn't look away, not immediately, and that made it worse. My hands fumbled for the towel I'd dropped, my face burning as I stammered. I didn't hear you knock." "I did," Ethan said, setting the tray on the table, his lips twitching like he was fighting a smile. "Guess you were distracted." His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried a spark, like he'd seen more than my bare skin in that moment. He'd seen me. I wrapped the towel around my waist, my pulse hammering. "Can you just leave it there?" "Thanks." My voice cracked, and I hated it. I wanted to disappear, to erase the last 30 seconds of my life. But Ethan lingered, adjusting the tray, his movements deliberate, like he was giving me time to breathe. "You okay?" he asked, glancing up. His eyes were kind, but there was something else there, curiosity, maybe, or recognition. It unnerved me. "Fine," I lied, avoiding his gaze. The city lights outside glittered, indifferent to my humiliation. I expected him to leave, to let me drown in my embarrassment, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled a napkin from the tray and set it beside the plate of pasta I'd ordered. "San Francisco's got a way of catching you off guard," he said, his voice soft but deliberate. "Happens to everyone. Don't sweat it." He paused, then added, "Nice sketches, by the way." He nodded toward my open sketchbook on the bed, where half-finished drawings of the Golden Gate Bridge sprawled across the pages. I blinked, caught off guard. "You looked at those?" "Hard not to. They're good." He flashed a smile, easy and warm, before stepping back toward the door. "Enjoy your meal, Jamie." He was gone before I could process that he'd used my name. I stood there, clutching the towel, my heart still racing, but for a different reason now. Something about Ethan's calm, his lack of judgment, had cracked open a door I'd kept locked for years. Growing up in Ohio, I'd learned to hide parts of myself, parts one didn't even have words for. The way I'd linger on certain guys in high school, the way my chest tightened when I saw couples holding hands in ways I couldn't imagine for myself. I'd come to San Francisco to escape that suffocation, but I hadn't expected it to follow me here, into this room, into this moment. I sat on the bed, staring at the pasta, but my mind was on Ethan. His smile, his steady voice, the way he'd seen my sketches, and me, without flinching. I didn't eat that night. Instead, I picked up my pencil and started drawing, trying to capture the feeling of that encounter, the way it had left me raw and alive. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window, my sketchbook open to a rough portrait of Ethan, his jawline, his eyes, the curve of his smile. I slammed it shut, embarrassed by my own obsession. I wasn't here to chase a waiter. I was here to find myself. But as I packed my bag for a day of exploring the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd already found something, or someone, who might change everything. I headed to the hotel lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of Ethan, maybe apologize for last night's chaos. The lobby buzzed with tourists and business travelers, but no sign of him. Disappointment tugged at me, sharper than I expected. I asked the front desk about him, trying to sound casual. Ethan? Oh, he's off today, the clerk said, barely looking up. Back tomorrow. Tomorrow. I had one more night at the hotel before I had to decide whether to stay in San Francisco or move on. One more chance to see him. I stepped outside, the city sprawling before me, alive with possibility and uncertainty. I didn't know then that Ethan would become the spark that set my world ablaze, or that our story would be one of courage, heartbreak, and a love I never thought I deserved. I spent the day wandering the city, sketching street performers in the Castro, cable cars clanging through steep streets, and the vibrant murals of the Mission District. San Francisco felt like a place where I could breathe, where I could be someone new. But every face I passed, every laugh I heard, reminded me of Ethan's voice, his steady presence. By evening, I was back in my room, sketching again, my thoughts tangled in questions I'd spent years avoiding. Who was I, really? And why did a stranger's kindness feel like the first real thing I'd ever known? The next morning, I woke with Ethan's face still haunting my sketchbook. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, a spark that would fade. But as I stood in the shower, the hot water doing little to wash away my nerves, I knew I was lying to myself. I had one more night in this hotel, one more chance to see him, and the thought made my stomach twist with something between fear and hope. I dressed carefully, swapping my usual paint-splattered jeans for a clean button-up, as if that could erase the memory of standing naked in front of him. Down in the lobby, I scanned the crowd, my heart leaping every time someone in a white shirt passed by. No Ethan. I ordered coffee at the hotel cafe, sketching absent-mindedly, my pencil tracing the lines of his smile from memory. I was so lost in it that I didn't notice him until he spoke. Drawing me again? Ethan's voice was teasing, but there was a warmth to it that made my cheeks burn. He stood by my table, tray balanced on one hip, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners. I slammed my sketchbook shut, nearly spilling my coffee. No, just the city. My words tripped over each other, and he laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through fog. Sure, he said, setting a fresh napkin on my table. You're Jamie, right? From room 412. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, sorry about last night. He waved it off. Happens more than you'd think. Part of the job. But his smile said it wasn't just part of the job. Not for him. Not this time. You sticking around San Francisco? For now, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, trying to figure some things out. He nodded, like he understood more than I was saying. This city's good for that. It's got a way of pulling the truth out of you. He paused, then added, if you need a guide, I'm off at 6. My heart stuttered. Was he asking me out? Or just being nice? I couldn't tell, but the way he looked at me, like he saw the parts of me I'd spent years hiding, made me want to find out. Maybe, I said, trying to sound casual. What's there to see? Everything, he said, grinning. But I'd start with the Castro. It's got heart. Meet me here at 6. I nodded, barely trusting my voice. He walked away, and I spent the rest of the day in a haze, sketching but barely seeing the page. The Castro. I'd heard of it. San Francisco's historic gay neighborhood, a place where people like me could be themselves. But I never dared go there, not really. The idea of meeting Ethan there felt like stepping off a cliff. At 6, I was back in the lobby, my hands sweaty, my sketchbook tucked under my arm like a shield. Ethan was waiting, out of his uniform now, in a faded denim jacket and jeans that hugged his frame. He looked different, less like a waiter, more like someone I could know, someone I wanted to know. Ready? He asked, his smile easy but his eyes searching, like he was testing the waters. We took a cable car to the Castro, the city blurring past us in a kaleidoscope of lights and sounds. Ethan talked easily, pointing out landmarks, telling stories about the city's history, how the Castro had been a haven for people who didn't fit anywhere else, how it had fought for its place in the world. I listened, But mostly I watched him, the way his hands moved when he talked, the way his laugh lit up his face. In the Castro, the streets were alive with color, rainbow flags fluttering above bars, couples holding hands, music spilling from open doors. I felt like an outsider, but Ethan moved through it like he belonged, greeting people by name, his warmth drawing smiles from strangers. We stopped at a small cafe, where he ordered us coffee and pastries, insisting I try something called a rainbow Danish. "You're quiet," he said, leaning back in his chair, studying me. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I hesitated, my fingers tracing the edge of my sketchbook. "Just taking it all in. This place, it's a lot." He nodded, his expression softening. "It can be. I grew up in Oakland, came here when I was 18. Took me a while to feel like I fit. But this city? It's home if you let it be." I wanted to ask what he meant, how he'd found that sense of belonging, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I opened my sketchbook and showed him the drawing I'd done of him, the one from last night. His eyes widened, then softened. "Damn, Jamie," he said, his voice low. "You've got talent. And you see people, don't you?" I shrugged, embarrassed but pleased. "I try." He leaned closer, his arm brushing mine, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just us. The hum of the cafe, the warmth of his skin, the way his eyes held mine. "Keep trying," he said. "You're going to find what you're looking for." That night, back in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. Ethan's words echoed in my head, mingling with the memory of his touch, his smile. I'd spent so long running from myself, from the truth of who I was. But here, in this city, with him, I felt the edges of that truth starting to take shape. The next day, I woke with Ethan's words still ringing in my ears. "You're going to find what you're looking for." I wanted to believe him, but doubt clung to me like damp fog. I'd spent years hiding, burying my feelings under layers of denial, telling myself I could be normal if I tried hard enough. But last night in the Castro, watching Ethan move through the world so unapologetically himself, I'd felt a spark of something new. Hope, maybe, or courage. I extended my stay at the hotel, unable to leave without understanding what was happening to me. I told myself it was about the city, about my art, but deep down, I knew it was about Ethan. I found him in the lobby that afternoon, delivering a tray to a guest. When he saw me, his face lit up, and my chest tightened in a way I couldn't ignore. "Back for more," he teased, wiping his hands on a towel. "Thought you'd be halfway to Napa by now." "Changed my mind," I said, trying to match his ease. "You free tonight?" His eyebrows shot up, but his smile didn't waver. "You asking me out, Jamie?" I froze, my face burning. I mean, if you want to show me more of the city." He laughed, a sound that cut through my panic. "Relax. I'm free. Meet me at 7, same spot." That night, we walked along the Embarcadero, the bay shimmering under the moonlight. Ethan told me about his life, how he'd grown up in a strict family in Oakland, how he'd come out at 16 and paid the price for it. His parents hadn't kicked him out, but they'd made it clear he wasn't welcome unless he fixed himself. He'd moved to San Francisco, worked odd jobs, and found a family in the friends he'd made here. "Does it get easier?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Being you." He stopped walking, turning to face me. The wind off the bay ruffled his hair, and his eyes were steady, searching. "It's not about easy. It's about being honest. With yourself, with the world. That's what makes it worth it." I wanted to tell him then, about the feelings I'd buried, the fears that kept me up at night, the way his presence made me want to be brave. But instead, I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. We ended up at a pier, sitting on a bench, the city lights reflecting off the water. Ethan pulled out a small sketchpad of his own, surprising me. "I dabble," he said, showing me rough drawings of the bay, the bridge, the people he saw every day. They weren't polished, but they were alive, full of heart. "You're good," I said, meaning it. "Why don't you do more?" He shrugged, closing the pad. Life gets in the way. Bills, family drama, you know. But I like it. Makes me feel free. I understood that more than I could say. Art had always been my escape, my way of making sense of a world that didn't always make sense to me. I opened my own sketchbook, showing him more of my work. Drawings of Ohio, of San Francisco, of him. He lingered on the portrait I'd done, his expression unreadable. "You're something else, Jamie," he said finally, his voice soft. "You've got a lot to say. You just gotta let yourself say it." Before I could respond, he leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm. I wanted to close the distance, to feel his warmth, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if this was just me, projecting my confusion onto him? But then he looked at me, his eyes steady and sure, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. "You ever gonna tell me what's really going on with you?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. I swallowed, my heart pounding. "I don't know how," I admitted. I've never said it out loud." He didn't push, just nodded, his hand resting lightly on my arm. "When you're ready, I'm here." That night, back in my room, I couldn't sleep. I paced, my sketchbook open to Ethan's portrait, my mind racing. I'd spent so long running from myself, but here, with him, I felt the walls I'd built starting to crack. I didn't know if I was ready to say the words, to admit I was gay, to claim that truth, but for the first time, I wanted to try. The next morning, I woke with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. Ethan's words, "When you're ready, I'm here," had lit something inside me, a fire I couldn't extinguish. I didn't know if I was ready to say the words, but I knew I couldn't keep running. Not from him, not from myself. I found Ethan in the hotel restaurant, clearing tables during the breakfast rush. He looked tired, his usual spark dimmed, and I wondered what his life was like outside these moments we shared. I waited until he had a break, then approached, my sketchbook clutched like a lifeline. "Hey," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Got a minute?" He glanced up, surprised, then smiled. "For you? Always." We sat in a corner booth, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I opened my sketchbook to a new page, a drawing I'd started last night, of two figures sitting by the bay, their silhouettes blurred but unmistakable. It was us. "I've never told anyone this," I began, my voice low. "Back in Ohio, I always felt different. Like I didn't fit. I'd watch guys at school, notice things I wasn't supposed to. I told myself it was nothing, that I could be what everyone expected. But it's not nothing. It's me." Ethan's eyes softened, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his presence steady, grounding. "I think I'm gay," I said, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. "And I'm terrified, but I'm also relieved. Because it's true. And I think I like you." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I braced for rejection, for judgment. But instead, Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Jamie," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that's the bravest thing I've ever heard." I blinked back, tears, relief, and fear crashing together. "What happens now?" He smiled, squeezing my hand. "Now you live. And I'm here, if you want me to be." That night, we went to a bar in the Castro, a place Ethan said was like a second home. It was loud, crowded, alive with people who didn't hide who they were. I felt out of place, but Ethan's hand on my back kept me grounded. We danced, awkward at first, then freer, the music pulling us closer until I could feel his heartbeat against mine. "I've never done this," I admitted, my face pressed against his shoulder. "I know," he said, his voice warm. "You're doing great." But the night wasn't all joy. As we left the bar, a group of guys shouted slurs from across the street, their voices cutting through the night. Ethan tensed, his hand tightening on mine, but he didn't let go. "Ignore them," he said, but I could hear the strain in his voice. It hit me then. how much courage it took for him to live openly, to face that kind of hate and still smile. I wanted that strength, that freedom. But I also saw the cost, the weight he carried. I pulled him closer, my heart aching for him, for us. Back at the hotel, we stood in the hallway outside my room, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. "Can I see you tomorrow?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I'm not going anywhere." But the next day, everything changed. I woke to a text from Ethan. "Family emergency. Gotta go to Oakland. I'll call you." My heart sank, a mix of worry and disappointment. I didn't hear from him all day, and by evening, the silence felt like a weight. I wandered the city, sketching to keep my mind off it, but every drawing turned into him. His eyes, his hands, the way he made me feel seen. When he finally called, his voice was strained. "It's my dad," he said. "He's sick. I don't know how long I'll be here." "I'm sorry," I said, my heart twisting. "Can I help?" He hesitated, then said, "Just don't forget me, okay?" I promised I wouldn't, but as the days passed, doubt crept in. What if this was too much, too fast? What if I wasn't ready for this, for him, for the world I was stepping into? A room service waiter walked in while I stood naked. What happened next still burns in my memory. The days without Ethan felt like a lifetime. I stayed in San Francisco, renting a cheap apartment in the Mission District, telling myself it was for my art, for the city, but really, it was for him. I sketched obsessively, filling pages with his face, our moments together, the Castro's vibrant chaos. But his texts grew sparse, his calls shorter, each one heavy with the weight of his father's illness. I tried to live the way he'd shown me, openly, bravely. I went back to the Castro, alone this time, sitting in the same cafe where we'd shared a rainbow Danish. I sketched the people around me, their laughter and love, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I was starting to belong, not just to the city, but to myself. 2 weeks later, Ethan called. "I'm back," he said, his voice tired but warm. "Can I see you?" I met him at the pier where we'd sat that night, the bay glittering under the stars. He looked worn, his eyes shadowed, but his smile was the same, bright, real. He told me about his dad's heart condition, the hospital visits, the fights with his family. "They still don't get me," he said, staring at the water. "But I can't change who I am. Not for them, not for anyone." I took his hand, my heart steady for once. "You don't have to." He looked at me, his eyes searching, and then he kissed me. It was soft at first, then urgent, like we were making up for lost time. The world fell away. The bay, the city, the fear, and all that mattered was him, us, this moment. "I was scared you'd leave," he admitted, his forehead pressed against mine. "That you'd go back to Ohio, or I don't know, disappear." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and I meant it. For the first time, I wasn't running. I was choosing him, myself, this life. We spent the next weeks together, building something real. We explored the city, shared sketches, laughed over late-night tacos. But it wasn't all easy. The slurs we'd heard that night weren't isolated. The world wasn't always kind. Ethan taught me to stand tall, to hold his hand even when people stared. And I taught him to slow down, to find joy in quiet moments, in the lines of a sketch. One night, in my tiny apartment, I showed him a new drawing, a portrait of us, standing together in the Castro, rainbow flags behind us. "This is how I see us," I said, my voice steady. "This is who I am." He pulled me close, his eyes shining. "You're incredible, Jamie Carter." A year later, we stood together at a pride parade, the streets alive with color and music. I wasn't the scared kid from Ohio anymore. I was an artist, a partner, a man who loved fiercely and unapologetically. Ethan squeezed my hand, his smile brighter than the sun. That moment in the hotel room, when I stood naked and exposed, had been the spark. What happened next, the shame, the fear, the love, had burned away the parts of me that didn't belong. What remained was the truth. I was gay, I was enough, and I was home. And as we marched through the Castro, surrounded by people who'd fought for this freedom, I knew that every step, every heartbeat, was a victory. Ethan and I weren't just a story. We were a promise to live, to love, to be.